Hi, welcome back. I will continue weaving on my robe. I'm still in the lattice pattern, and so I'm talking about history as well as weaving. So yesterday I talked about Kendrick and Gray, the first American fur traders along our coast, and they headed out of Boston in 1787. They arrived around the Nootka area in September 1788, because it takes about a year to get there. And so I want to read you a poem that this person wrote about Chief Koya, and that is before the Americans came up there and caused so much bad blood between the traders. And so here is Taylor and his poem from the summer of 1787. So here's what he had to write about Chief Koya. He appeared to me a just man with a very susceptible heart. The natives paid great attention to him, and altogether he seemed to me to be more calculated for a chief than any man I saw on the coast of America. Such manly conduct merits our applause, and pleasant 'tis to treat on such a cause. Here courage, zeal, and honesty combine, and fair humanity doth nobly shine. At once the chief, the guardian, and the friend, his precepts teach the visions to amend. Anxious ever to avert offense, his every action marks the man of sense. Farewell, good chief, integrity pursue. Some abler pen may aptly mention you. So unfortunately, at the minute that Taylor was putting down these wonderful observations of this Chief Koya, out of Boston was coming Kendrick. And Kendrick came up there in 1790 and then returned in 1791 and treated the chief quite devastatingly poor and bad, and it caused so much eventual violence that Koya changed, and he stopped being the valiant man that Officer Taylor had described in the summer of 1787. So I wanted to say that because you aren't going to hear that poem anywhere. What you're going to hear, if you ever hear about Kendrick or Gray, is the massacres, the murderous Haidas. But the one thing that I'm here for is to talk about textiles. And I didn't mention that I didn't mention the observations of the textiles that were happening in the American voyages there. So I wanted to read to you the observations that the Americans had in regards to what we were wearing. The natives of the Sound, their dress is in general a garment with 3 sides square, the lower edge rounding with a fringe, and the upper edge trimmed with fur on each side, about 2 inches in breadth. The garment is composed of wool of the mountain sheep, but the rest of the garment is made of the bark of a cedar tree beat to a state that its sum resembles hemp. These garments are generally worn under the left arm and tied near the corners over the right shoulder. With this, they generally wore another garment resembling a petticoat with a small hole large enough to admit the head. This was falling over the shoulders, reaching as low as the elbows. They wore curious conical caps on their heads, but their feet and legs are always bare. In very rainy or cold weather, they generally wear a bear, wolf skin, or deer's. They have also blankets of excellent workmanship, of the wools of mountain sheep, and as well done as though it was wove in a loom. So he mentions the wool garments that the people in the Nuchanuth tribe, people, and in near the Vancouver Island area. So then he's on the Lady Washington, and remember the Lady Washington is the first to go up to Haida territory, and so let's see what they see up there in the Haida territory. So this is Cloak Bay and Captain Gray. Remember I was saying Captain Gray was one of the first people to touch his foot on Haida territory. So at 6 p.m., a vast number of natives, men, women, and children, came off and brought with them several sea otter skins. We understood of them that there was a large tribe not far off. The weather was very thick, hazy, and we were but a little distance from the land. We soon saw their village, from which they launched 20 or 30 very large canoes and came off in great parade, paddling off swiftly and singing in a very agreeable air. So that was in 1789, that first trip with the smaller boat captained by Gray. And so of these people were purchased to the amount of 200 skins in a very few moments for 1 chisel each. So, so Gray does talk about the Custa and Chief Cunnia, its chief. So we bought all the skins that appeared to have by 10 in the evening when they returned to their village for the night, so no doubt intending to bring off more in the morning. But we did not stop, but stood on to the southward. The natives called their village Custa. It is situated in a sandy bay on the northwest end of the island. Their chief's name is Cunnia, and appears to be a very good old fellow. His wife was off and had vast authority over every person alongside. So he meets Cunnia. He talks about the villages there, and anyway, so I'll probably post Backstrom's painting of Cunnia. Their dress is sort of a mantle made of various skins, such as the sea otter, sable, raccoon, and some others, so mutilated as not to be known. Also European cloth and clothing on which they have sewed in various directions as fancy or fashion suggests, buttons, thimbles, china cash, pieces of shells, etc. In this dress they have truly a grotesque appearance. There is another garment which seems peculiar to the women. This is a thin leather frock reaching a little below the knees, with sleeves, and tied under the chin. Sometimes they are edged with a strip of sea otter skin. They also have a flaxen garment similar to those seen at Chickelset, which they put on at times over the leathern one. On their heads they wear a sort of shallow wicker work cap. This is tied under the chin. They gave no covering for their legs and feet. So that is Hoskin's narrative in July 1791, when Gray comes back. Okay, and then Haskins goes on to describe the Haida gender roles. Cooking is here the province of the women, in which they are very clean. The women also make their various garments, which are sewn together, the female having a number of sharp bones of various sizes, according to the fineness of the work. With one of these she makes a hole. Then with the intestines of some animal, neatly twisted into a thread, she puts through it, and so continues to do till the work is done. Thus, in this simple manner is this work performed, and with a neatness, I may say, elegance, that would not disgrace ladies in a more civilized country. The skins are all cleaned by the women, which are first scraped with a knife or clamshell, and then rubbed with the rough side of the starfish, keeping it well wet with fresh water. This operation is continued to be performed until the skin is sufficiently stretched, when it is left to dry. So that is I found that in the book called Voyages of the Columbia. So together we can tell that the Haida had a very tailored fashion, that they had clothes that had sleeves, and they were excellent sewers. So, and when they say the mantle made of skins is so mutilated, it means that, you know, they were cut and put together that you could not see what kind of animal that it came from. So, so those were the observations of the first American traders. And I just wanted to be able to read those, because that's what my research was all about, is the very first contacts before there was too much cultural infringement into our traditional ways. So those things give me clues as to our ancient garments and fashions, and very much our textiles were part of that. So I'm going to continue weaving, but the Haidas were here from time out of mind. I mean, we have stories that we were discovered from a cockle shell, that the raven stubbed his toe on a cockle shell, and he looked, and there were people, and the people, he didn't eat those little people because he already had a feast, and so they were lucky and they were able to populate our island. But archaeologically, they say that we were very insulated on our island once it became an island. Before the big trees gave us enough material to create canoes to go to the mainland, we were pretty much insulated on our island. And they know that archaeologically because of the tools that the people used here. There's a slightly different toolbox of the ancient Haida compared to the mainland people. So we had ourselves to ourselves, and we developed our culture separately. Our language is what they call an isolate. We don't have any other language related to ours in all of the world. And even our closest neighbors, we don't share words with each other. The one we do share the word for the form line chief's robe, Nahin. So there is a few spattering of word sharing, but really, on the whole, we're very separate from the mainland for a very long time, and it's proven through language study. You know, all of New Zealand is about the size of British Columbia, and it almost even has a similar climate, but all of New Zealand has the same dialect. They share the same language and the exact same way of using that language. Where Haida Gwaii, this island, it's a good sized island, but the whole island has more than, I think we have close to 4 dialects within our island. There's the Skidegate lower southern dialect of the Ungit Haidas, and then there's the Skidegate Haida dialect, and then there's the Masset dialect. And my mother used to talk about that the hierarchy, the chiefs people, they even spoke different than the common people. So that was a different dialect. So our language shows that we were here a very long time, and in our isolation, our culture developed in a very unique way. So even though we were here earlier than the cedar was became a very big part of our culture. And so the first clothing were cedar, pounded cedar that came from hanging the loom. And so our cedar robes were rectangular and square. And so when we started trading with the mainland for the wool, then then we created robes of rectangular robes. So our robes became rectangular. And then when the traders came, they came with bolts of fabric. And let's go back here. They came with bolts of fabric and blankets. So when they came with blankets, they were already made clothing for us, because our robes were the rectangular and square forms that those blankets came. And then with the bolts of fabric, we would cut those bolts into squares or rectangulars for the robes that we eventually would drape over our shoulders. But we couldn't just drape a cut length of fabric. We also needed to make sure that we had the identifiers, the designs on our robes, because our traditional robes all had these designs that had messages. And so when the bolts of fabric came, we started wearing them. We cut them square or rectangular, and then we put designs on them. And we put designs on them the traditional way that we used to put designs on our other robes. So we got those shells and the bird beaks, and we placed them in design manners, placements that had messages and declared identity, and all of the other things that we use our robes for. We use the trader's cloth in that manner. So it all was, the fashion was all shaped by the weaver's loom. And that was how the weavers were very important in how we presented ourselves and how we clothed ourselves. So I thank you very much for joining me, and I hope that you enjoyed the history as well as seeing my hands move. And thank you so much for being here.